The trench appeared overnight. A deep, raw scar of dirt circled Marcus Hale's home like a warning he didn't understand, and before this story ends, the truth behind it will leave everyone stunned. Marcus had lived on Willow Creek Road for 12 quiet years. His small ranch home sat on a gentle rise surrounded by oak trees and a wide stretch of open land he had inherited from his father. It wasn't flashy, but it was peaceful, the kind of place where mornings arrived with birdsong and evenings faded into golden silence. He had left for 3 weeks to care for his mother after surgery. When he returned, the earth around his property had been ripped open, a trench, nearly 4 feet deep and several feet wide, carved an unbroken ring around his land. No driveway access, no walkway, no explanation, just yellow stakes, orange flags, and fresh piles of dirt like barricades. Across the road, neighbors stood in small clusters, whispering. Some looked away when he glanced toward them. Others watched with guarded curiosity. Marcus parked along the roadside and carried his suitcase across a narrow plank someone had laid across the trench, as if this invasion had already been normalized. At his mailbox, a laminated notice flapped in the wind. HOA Infrastructure Project, Authorized Work Zone. He stared at the words, confusion tightening in his chest. He had never joined the HOA. Never signed any agreement. Never granted access to his land, yet someone had dug a boundary around his home as if claiming it, and the silence from the neighborhood felt heavier than the trench itself. That night, Marcus stood on his porch staring at the torn earth circling his home. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't construction, it was intimidation, and he had no idea it was only the beginning. By sunrise, the trench felt less like construction and more like a siege, and Marcus sensed someone wanted him to feel trapped. He walked the perimeter slowly, boots sinking into loose soil. The trench cut off his driveway entirely, forcing him to park on the road. Wooden stakes marked corners with fluorescent tape, but none bore his name or permit details. He photographed everything, every angle, every marker, every foot of disturbed land. Across the street, Mrs. Klein finally approached, her expression nervous. They said it's for drainage upgrades, she whispered. Stormwater control. HOA project. Marcus frowned. I'm not part of the HOA. She hesitated. They said all properties in the expansion zone apply. Expansion zone, he had received no notice. No vote. No documentation. At noon, a white pickup arrived bearing the HOA logo. A man in a pressed polo shirt stepped out, holding a tablet and a tight smile. Mr. Hale, he said. Temporary inconvenience. This improves neighborhood value. Marcus folded his arms. You dug around private property. The man's smile stiffened. Your parcel lies within planned infrastructure improvements. I never approved this. The representative tapped his tablet. Work orders were authorized. By who? The man didn't answer directly. Instead, he turned and left. No apology, no timeline, no reassurance, just dust drifting behind the truck as it disappeared. That evening, Marcus noticed something else. New security lights mounted at the HOA entrance, a camera aimed down Willow Creek Road, and a second camera pointing directly toward his property. The trench wasn't just physical, it was psychological, and as darkness settled over the silent neighborhood, Marcus realized he needed proof, because whatever was happening here wasn't about drainage. Someone wanted him watched and controlled. The second morning brought heavy machinery, and with it, the unmistakable sound of escalation. Marcus awoke to the grinding roar of a backhoe extending the trench deeper along the eastern edge of his land. The operator avoided eye contact, focusing on the dirt as if the task required emotional distance. Dust floated through the morning air, settling over Marcus's porch rail like fine ash. He stepped outside, phone in hand, recording. When he approached the machine, the operator stopped and removed his headphones. I'm just following the work order, he said. Who issued it? Marcus asked. HOA Development Board. Marcus felt a tightening in his chest. This isn't HOA land. The man looked uncomfortable. You should talk to the office. Before Marcus could respond, the engine roared back to life. The trench deepened, widened, became harder to cross. By afternoon, a temporary metal barrier was placed near the driveway gap, forcing Marcus to carry groceries across uneven planks like a trespasser entering his own property. From his kitchen window, he noticed neighbors watching again, but none intervened. Silence had become complicity. That evening, Marcus opened the wooden chest his father had left him. Inside were land surveys, property maps, and original boundary records dating back 40 years. He spread them across the dining table. Every document confirmed the same truth. The trench sat fully inside his legal boundary, his land, his rights, yet the digging continued. As night settled, Marcus installed something he had purchased years earlier but never needed: small motion-activated cameras positioned discreetly among tree branches and fence posts. If someone wanted to watch him, he would watch back, because deep in his gut, Marcus knew the trench wasn't finished. And neither was whatever plan the HOA had set into motion. On the third night, the neighborhood fell unnaturally quiet, the kind of silence that signals something is about to happen. At 2:14 a.m., Marcus's phone vibrated, motion detected. He sat upright in bed and opened the camera feed. 3 figures moved along the trench line carrying equipment and portable lights. They wore reflective vests but no company markings. Marcus watched as they placed additional stakes closer to his porch and measured distances with laser tools. Then one man drove a metal post into the ground inside Marcus's yard. His pulse quickened. He recorded everything, every movement, every measurement, every unauthorized step. When one figure approached the porch light, Marcus held his breath. The man paused, scanning the property as if checking for witnesses. Then they continued working. At 3:02 a.m., they left. By morning, new posts stood only feet from his front steps, tightening the perimeter like a tightening fist. Marcus drove to the county records office with copies of his land survey. The clerk reviewed them carefully, then looked up. "These boundaries are clear," she said. "No easement. No access authorization." He felt a mix of relief and dread. Then why are they digging? She hesitated before answering. "You're not the first to ask about HOA expansion tactics." The words lingered in the air, expansion tactics, when Marcus returned home. He noticed a printed notice taped to his door: "Final infrastructure phase begins tomorrow." He stared at the message, then at the trench closing around his home. They weren't asking, they were advancing, and now he had proof, but he didn't yet know how far they were willing to go. The next morning, the trench became a boundary no longer symbolic but functional, and Marcus realized they intended to isolate him completely. Workers installed temporary piping along sections of the trench, blocking even the narrow plank crossing he had used. When he asked for access, they directed him to a gravel path half a mile down the road. It was inconvenience designed as pressure. Marcus stayed calm. He documented everything. At noon, a black SUV arrived. 2 HOA board members stepped out, accompanied by a legal consultant carrying a leather folder. "We're implementing necessary infrastructure improvements," one stated calmly. Marcus handed them copies of his land survey. The consultant scanned the pages, expression tightening. "This property is outside HOA jurisdiction," he admitted. The board members exchanged tense glances. "But the drainage plan," one began, "does not override private ownership." The consultant finished. Silence hung between them. Marcus said nothing. He simply watched. That evening, he reviewed the night footage again, the unauthorized posts, the measurements, the silent entry onto his land. He compiled the clips into a timeline: date, time, trespass, modification, encroachment. For the first time since returning home, he felt steady, not angry, not afraid, prepared, because what the trench had tried to do, isolate him, had instead created evidence. And somewhere beyond the oak trees, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, darkening the sky. Marcus stood on his porch, watching the wind ripple through the dirt piles. Tomorrow, the final phase would begin, but this time, he would be ready. At sunrise, concrete trucks arrived, and with them, the final move Marcus had feared. Workers began pouring footings near the metal posts placed days earlier, positioning forms that suggested permanent structures. The trench was no longer temporary, it was becoming infrastructure. Marcus stepped forward, phone recording. "I have documentation this is private land," he said calmly. The foreman hesitated but continued directing workers. Minutes later, 2 county vehicles pulled onto Willow Creek Road. Marcus hadn't called them that morning, but someone had. An inspector approached the site, reviewing permits and surveying the footings. His expression hardened. "These coordinates exceed approved work zones," he said. The foreman stopped pouring. HOA board members arrived shortly after, their confidence replaced by visible strain. Marcus presented his footage: night entry, unauthorized posts, boundary violations. The inspector watched in silence, then he turned to the board: "All work stops immediately pending review." The words landed with final authority. Machinery shut down, concrete flow ceased, workers stepped back. For the first time since the trench appeared, the air felt still. But the true shock hadn't arrived yet, because as the inspector reviewed the documents, he asked a single question: who authorized work inside this parcel despite clear boundary filings? No one answered, and in that silence, the balance of power shifted. Marcus looked at the trench surrounding his home, no longer a prison, but evidence, and the cameras in the trees had captured everything. Within weeks, the trench was filled, the land restored, and the silence that once protected the HOA now worked against them. County investigators confirmed unauthorized encroachment, trespass, and property interference. The night footage Marcus recorded became central evidence, establishing a timeline of deliberate boundary violations. The HOA's insurance carrier intervened, legal advisors shifted strategy, and settlement discussions began quietly. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now approached Marcus with hesitant apologies. Some admitted they had questioned the project but feared penalties or rising fees. The truth spread slowly through Willow Creek Road. The trench had not been about drainage. It had been pressure to push Marcus into compliance, pressure to absorb his land into future development plans. Instead, it had exposed systemic overreach. By autumn, Marcus received formal compensation for damages, restoration costs, and legal violations. More importantly, the HOA adopted strict oversight rules requiring verified land surveys and county approval before any future projects. The cameras came down, the oak trees remained, and the land his father left him stayed exactly where it belonged. One evening, Marcus stood on his porch watching the sunset settle over smooth, restored soil. The scar around his home had vanished, but the lesson remained: quiet resilience can be stronger than intimidation. Across the road, children rode bikes along the pavement where machines once stood. Peace had returned, but it had been earned, and that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you love the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps this channel grow.